Let us begin. Okay, thank you so much, and Shavua Tov. Fantastic to see you. I really hope that the last month has been fruitful for all of you, the Chagim, that you're re-energized as we enter into the winter. It's like you can see the ants are foraging for their final meals and bringing them home, putting them under. So in that sense, we also are gathering some food during the Chagim. Our harvest, Sukkot, is the festival of the harvest. And in that sense, now that we've harvested all of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot as well, so now it's time to take that all inside into our houses, and we'll keep it inside at least until Hanukkah. Maybe that's when our light comes out again and we start shining it to the world. But now it's sort of a sense of harvesting this period, and it's a time for focus and for concentration. And it's actually a very good time for very serious learning. And we're going to begin now this semester, and we're going to get into one of the, I would say, one of, the essential things to learn. And I think through the subject of Shabbat, which we will be learning, it's basically about everything. We just learned this week that Shabbat was the final piece of the creation of Hashem in this world. And in that sense, learning of Shabbat, also learning and understanding the halachot and how they work and all of the particular details, which may seem to be at first very confusing or frustrating, or I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. If I don't know, I probably can't do it. Hopefully we'll understand through the learning, both the reasoning behind Shabbat, what we should be doing on Shabbat, and also the framework of understanding what it is that we don't do and why we don't do it. So the first shiurim will be led by Rav Shmuel, who is here now. And Rav Shmuel is joining us from Helsinki, and he will be giving the first shiurim and also letting you know where we are in the book of Halakha, so that you can prepare for the following weeks as well. So the framework that we will be learning is, first we're going to be learning about the basic guidelines of Shabbat, followed by the framework of Shabbat, the Shabbat schedule, you can call it, and then we're going to go into details of Shabbat itself and what is allowed, and also specifically the 39 milachot that we do not do because they're connected to creation, and Shabbat is about receiving and not changing or transforming. But we'll get into all of that later on. Rav Shmuel, after these words of introduction, I'm going to pass the microphone over to you, to our Talmidim that we have here from all over Scandinavia, joining you now in Helsinki. Please, bevakasha.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Nice to meet all of you. And it's a great honor for me to start this series, or this part on Shabbat. It's of course one of the most essential things in the Torah. I actually just on Yom Kippur night on Kol Nidrei, I was speaking from the community, and it's actually a common misconception of many people that Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the Jewish year. If you look at the Torah, it's actually Shabbat. It is very much the holiest day. We don't think about it because we have it every single week, but Shabbat is actually considered stricter than Yom Kippur. It's in the times of the Torah, people would be punished by stoning, by the most strictest death penalty. There are reasons why it was very rare that they would ever come to such a punishment, because you would need certain witnesses and a certain system, which is very complicated, but in theory at least, whereas there was no such punishment for Yom Kippur. So Shabbat is definitely one of the most basic building blocks of Jewish life. So I thought about, I'll start with asking you really, can anybody here tell me where was Shabbat mentioned for the first time? Where do we find Shabbat for the first time? And everybody who's been following the weekly parashiot will know immediately because we talked about it just yesterday. Anybody can tell me? Okay. Please say, Michael and Eva.
Hi, it's maybe they didn't call it Shabbat, but in Parashat Bereshit already they said that the 7th day that God finished His work and
very good.
In Nafash.
Very, very good. Yes, we said we said after the 6 days of creation, Hashem completed the creation. Hashem finished all His work. He's blessed that day. God blessed it. And He rested. That's the idea of Shabbat. Of course, we don't resting. God is not a person who needs to go to sleep, right? But it means He stopped the creative work and brought rest to the world, and that is the concept of Shabbat for the first time. And this is a very, very crucial point when you're going to enter the laws of Shabbat in detail. I mentioned that Shabbat is extremely stringent, extremely important, and it would give a person very big punishments. Very often you will run into this term that somebody is a shomer Shabbat. Somebody, he keeps Shabbat or he does not keep Shabbat. Yeah, he's a mechalel Shabbat. He's a desecrator of the Shabbat. Now, why is it so important? There are many, many mitzvot here. You don't hear so often people talking about this person. He keeps the laws of shatnez, like not to mix wool and linen in the same clothes. So he doesn't pray his prayers. The very interesting that Talmud considers a Jew who breaks Shabbat publicly in front of everybody else, who does not care at all about Shabbat. In many areas of halacha, he will be considered the same as a non-Jew. Yeah, we'll see. There's a lot to talk about on that subject, but just to tell you that somebody who does not care about Shabbat, in a way, is seen as denying the basics of the religion. And the reason for that is this very thing, that the Shabbat is connected to the creation of the world. 6 days he worked, on the 7th he rested. If you don't keep that, then you don't accept the most basic idea of Judaism. God created the world. And vice versa, if you do keep it, you are showing that you very much do believe in the fact that God created the world and that this is God's world. So that's the first time we meet Shabbat in the Torah, right? Then, okay, but that's of course for the world at large, yeah? And it's not really practical because the world was never expected to keep Shabbat, yeah? In fact, as we will see, Shabbat is actually very, very much specific to Jewish people and to our special connection. Does anybody know when does God specifically tell people to start keeping Shabbat? At least where can we see in the Torah that God tells the Jewish people as a people to keep Shabbat? Any ideas?
Is the story with the guy in the forest that like is gathering wood and then the other guys come and they're like, hey dude, it's Shabbat, please stop doing that. And you know, my own narrative, not worried, but it's that story. And then they talk about stoning him. Okay,
that was very, very good knowledge. Very, very good. There is such a story in the Torah, you're quite right, a little bit later, of a man Mekoshesh etzim b'yom HaShabbat, somebody is cutting wood on Shabbat, and because of that, he gets stoned to death. It's a scary story a bit. What I always find the most interesting in that story is that it was the only time somebody broke Shabbat during the whole 40 years in the desert. Just gives you an idea of what was what sort of levels they were up to. But that's not the first time God commands very clearly in the Torah to keep Shabbat. You're right. That's the first time we see somebody breaking God's commandment. But why does God actually tell the people that you have to keep Shabbat? Anybody, any ideas? It's a very, very famous part of the Torah. Very, very famous.
It's at least in the 10 Commandments in Exodus.
Excellent. 10 Commandments. 10 Commandments. Now, so if you give me a moment, I would like to just share a screen with you. Let me find the right. Wait a second. What happened to what I was just showing you? Right. So let's do like this. Share a screen and we will look at this. Okay. Here we have the famous 10 Commandments. And we have among the 10 Commandments, 4th commandment, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadesho. Remember the Shabbat day and keep it holy. Okay? Now I want all of you to remember this word, to remember. Zachor, yeah? To remember Shabbat. That's a very important sentence. Why do I want you to remember that? Because there is actually 2 versions of the 10 Commandments in the Torah. You have the 10 Commandments here in Yitro, where it actually happens, right? God comes to the whole nation and teaches them tells them the 10 Commandments. And then you have a retelling of the story, very interesting. If you go to the end of the Torah, if you've been following the parashiot, it was Vayetchanan, so it was in the summer. It's always after Tisha B'Av, end of the summer, August. There we also have the 10 Commandments. Let me just get you the right place. It's a little bit lower. Here. You've also got 10 Commandments. This is at the end of Moses' life. He tells the story again to the people. This is what happened to your parents, and they saw the Hashem speaking to them. And when Moses retells the 10 Commandments again, he retells them in a slightly different version than the one we actually have in the text in Yitro. Lots of different explanations. Why is that? Lots of deep ideas, which we don't really have time to go now. This is not a shiur on Torah, on Parashat HaShavua, right? Or on Chumash. But what's important for us to know, and what's very essential, is when he there brings out this Shabbat, he says like this, not Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, not remember the Shabbat day, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho. Observe the Shabbat day and keep it holy.
Slicha, I can't see the picture. The next
Okay.
one.
So I'm screen sharing. So you should be. Let me see. Let me see what.
Yeah, Rav Shmuel, maybe stop sharing and then reshare again because we see the original, the same one that you showed before. Now we can see it. Thank you.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, I can see because they're 2 separate windows. You have to actually share it. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So here, if you can see, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho, to guard the Shabbat, to sanctify, to observe the Shabbat. Now, these 2 terms are very important for you to keep in mind. There is the mitzvah of Zachor, to remember the Shabbat, and the mitzvah of Shamor, to guard the Shabbat. Right? The Midrash tells us what actually, I can see a hand has been raised. Yes.
Can you please tell us where we can find it in the Torah in Hebrew? Because
yes, so if you look at here, it's the first one The first one is in Exodus 20.
Yeah, but what is Exodus in Hebrew? I'm sorry.
Shemot.
Shemot.
Shemot, chapter 20, verse 8.
Okay, and the second one.
And the second one is Dvarim, chapter 5, verse 12.
Can you say it? You'd bet.
Okay, sorry. So it's Shemot Kaf, Perek Kaf, Pasuk Chet,
Okay.
and Dvarim, Perek Hey, Pasuk Yud Bet.
Thank you.
Okay. So you have Zachor and you have Shamor. Yeah. And the Talmud, the Midrashim, they tell us that actually the two words came from God simultaneously. At the same time, God said Zachor and Shamor, which is something a human can't do, but from God you could hear two different sounds simultaneously. Yeah, and we actually say that on Friday night. Friday night we sing a song at the beginning before Ma'ariv called Lecha Dodi, very, very famous song. And we start Shamor veZachor bedibur echad. Shamor and Zachor were said in one word. And this is a very important symbolically, it's very important symbolically to understand that in Shabbat you need these two facets, these two parts. You have to remember the Shabbat, and you have to keep the Shabbat. And the Talmud and the commentaries and the Rambam, those who count the mitzvot, they count two separate mitzvot. Mitzvah remembering Shabbat is connected to the positive acts that we do make. Yeah. What, I'll ask you, does anybody here know what is the big ritual we do at the beginning of Shabbat? Yeah. More specific, maybe before the meal on Friday night. What do we do?
Lighting the candles.
Okay, so that's a good one. The rabbis instituted lighting candles so that there should be light in the house, because you're not allowed to light a fire, as we will see in Be'ezrat Hashem. So therefore, you light candles, it shouldn't be dark in the house. And that's a very special mitzvah. You're very, very right. But that's not what I was looking for. There's a very specific, yes?
We read the Kiddush and we
Kiddush.
drink the wine and we eat the bread.
Thank you very much. Okay. Kiddush, right? Kiddush is what's special, yeah? The bread is something you can do any day. You can bless bread, yeah, before the meal. On Shabbat, what's interesting on Shabbat is the Kiddush, because that's not something we would usually do. Usually, you always start with bread and then you eat whatever else you want and you make blessings and whatever. Or you don't make blessings, that's another shiur, Hilchot Brachot. But Shabbat, we do something completely out of the ordinary, and we take a cup of wine and we make Kiddush. Yes, again, somebody wrote Kiddush, very good. Kiddush. Now, that's at the beginning of Shabbat. What do we do at the end of Shabbat? What is the ritual at the end of Shabbat, tomorrow that Shabbat is over?
Havdalah.
Havdalah, very good. Havdalah, yeah. So this is, the Chachamim explain, we do the mitzvah of Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, to remember the day of Shabbat, and it's written in Shemot, in Exodus. You remember Shabbat by making a clear ritual to mark that Shabbat has started, and you make a clear ritual to mark that Shabbat has ended. That's how you do that mitzvah. Now, how do you do the mitzvah of Shamor et Yom HaShabbat? You have to keep the Shabbat. Shamor is always related to guarding, to preventing, to not doing things. So I would like to ask, who would like to read here a little bit? You can read in English. From here, verse 13. Have any volunteers?
I can do it.
Okay, go ahead. Okay.
6th day you should labor and do all your work.
Very good. You shall labor and do all your work. And read the next verse as well.
But the 7th day is a Shabbat of your God.
Shem.
You should
shall-
not do any work. You, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your ox or your ass, or any of your cattle, or the stranger in your settlements, so that your male and female slave may rest as you do.
Very good. Okay. Now I'm going to point out here to you some things which are not. It's very good we read it in English. Now there's some things you will not realize if you're only reading the English. And that's one of the reasons why it's very, very important to learn Hebrew, to study Torah. 6 ימים תעבוד, 6 days you shall labor, ועשית כל מלאכתך, shall do all your work. Now the word here for work is melacha. You shall do all your melacha, melachtecha. We continue. But the 7th day is Shabbat of your God. ויום השביעי שבת השם אלוהיך. לא תעשה, you shall not do כל מלאכה. You shall not do any work. The word here is melacha is forbidden, not avodah. Very important. Yeah, we say in the beginning, 6 days you shall work, and you shall do all your melacha. So the 6 days you do avodah and melacha. But Shabbat, what's forbidden? Melacha. It doesn't speak about avodah. So the translation work is not really the best translation, and there really isn't a perfect translation for melacha, because it's a very specific Hebrew term. If you remember, we're talking about the creation of the world, and you'll notice when you say Kiddush on Friday night, you will notice this word there, because we actually say that paragraph that speaks about Shabbat in the story of creation. We say it then, and then we use this word, he rested from all the melacha. So melacha is related to creating, to the type of work God did in creating. Okay, now that's of course a very vague line. Yeah, what does it mean, God creating? We're not creating anything. And yeah, we're not God. But that gives already an idea. The reason why I'm stressing this, and I think it's going to be very important, as we're going to go into the melachot. One of the big problems you will meet when you speak to Jews who are not, don't know so much or don't observe so much, they'll tell you, yeah, Shabbat, I relax, I rest, but I don't keep all the, I don't know why the rules so strict. You know, you carry a handkerchief in your pocket outside, that's forbidden. And then you sometimes have the opposite. You have something that's very heavy and it's perfectly fine on Shabbat. Sometimes you have a party, a simcha, and you decide to go to your downstairs and carry a very heavy table upstairs. So you will see there'll be things in Shabbat which don't, if you're thinking in the sense of resting and working, they're not going to make sense to you. And that's why it's very important to understand we're talking about something else here. We're not talking about avodah. We're not talking necessarily about resting in the sense that, you know, I'm going to have a good sleep. Yeah, that as well. There's a mitzvah to enjoy Shabbat, which Be'ezrat Hashem you'll hear about in the following shiurim. But that is not necessarily the main point. The main point of Shabbat is it's a day of connecting to the fact that God created the world. He rested on the 7th. I'm going to do the same and connect to God and to the fact He created the world, strengthen my belief in Him, strengthen my connection to Him, rest from certain activities which are not in line with that. Now,
Shmuel,
yes.
just if I can add, there's a very interesting debate now in Israeli society because Ben Gurion, when he established the state of Israel, he said, well, we see Shabbat as a social benefit for the entire country to keep Shabbat as a day of rest. And in that sense, it was obvious for him that we all keep Shabbat and that there be no public transportation, for example, in order to keep the framework of the Shabbat. Now, today, now because people are following, like you say, well, they say, well, it's a day of rest, but we can traveled, so they're not following the Torah in the sense of what is a melacha, so that then they get other ideas of what that actually should be, and then there becomes a debate about it, because the idea of rest is very different than very specific laws that you set, in which the Torah, through the understanding of the creation of the world, understands what the melacha is. So I think it really brings forward the question: are you following the Torah and understanding through the Torah's eyes of what melacha is, or it is just an abstract idea of what rest is, which could be very different for different people?
Okay, very good. Thank you for the intervention. Right. So this is going to really be our central focus, to understand the melachot. Yeah, understand. You can have further shiurim where you're going to go more into the details of the kiddush and the Havdalah and all the different positive things we do to do the mitzvah of zachor. And I'm going to try to lead you into the world of melachot, understanding what you can't do on Shabbat. And both of them are, of course, extremely important. So I have to define melacha. So the way the Chachamim define it is very interesting. Does anybody here know what was the center? What did the Jews pray in or serve in the desert? In the 40 years of the desert, what did the Jews have as a center of service or prayer? They didn't have a synagogue. They didn't have a temple.
The tabernacle.
Tabernacle, very good. Tabernacle, in Hebrew, the Mishkan. And that, when they build the tabernacle, when they build the Mishkan, the Torah tells us about its building, and it says specifically you cannot build it on Shabbat. Yeah, even though it's a great mitzvah and it's very important, but on Shabbat, even that has to stop. And from there, the Chachamim derive for us what exactly is the melacha. The melacha is whatever was needed or done for the purposes of building the Mishkan. And that really brings us to the Mishnah. So wait a second. Yes, here. And I will.
You're the only one here?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I have activities with the kids, but we tried the last minute, so.
Okay, good. Okay, great. Okay, by the way, I can see a question here. Okay, maybe I'll leave a bit of space for answering these questions in the chat at the end of the shiur, maybe, because not to disturb the flow of the shiur. Okay. So now you've seen in front of you, I'll just put the English side, quite a scary looking Mishnah. Just to give you a little bit of background, know how much you have discussed in the shiurim, the development of the Torah, the Talmud, the Mishnah. Some of you might be more familiar with it, some others might be less familiar with it. So the basic ideas of Judaism is that Hashem gave the Torah on Mount Sinai. And when we talk about Torah, we talk about two things. We talk about the written text, which God dictated to Moses. And we also talk about Torah shebe'al peh, the oral Torah, the teaching and the explanation how you're meant to understand the Torah. And that oral Torah was passed on from Hashem to Moshe, from Moshe to Yoshua, Yoshua to the elders. Those of you who are going to come to the Pirkei Avot shiur on Wednesday night will know that Pirkei Avot, you will see, actually starts with telling you how the oral Torah was passed on from generation to generation until much later, in about in around the year 200, like good 150 years after the destruction of the temple, there was a fear that the oral Torah will be forgotten, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote down the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is the writing down of these rules which till then were passed on orally. And the Mishnah then forms a very basic, that is the main focus of the Talmud. Later, the little piece of Mishnah led to a lot of discussions, both in Babylon, both in Israel, and the Gemara came to discuss this piece of Mishnah, and together Mishnah and Gemara form the Talmud. There are two Talmuds. There is the Jerusalem Talmud and there is the Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud being the main and most used Talmud. But this is So here in front of you, you have a piece of Mishnah. So again, you wanted, people are asking for where to find them. So it's a Mishnah in Tractate Shabbat, chapter 7, Mishnah 2. It looks like a bit of a scary, long list, but we'll see very soon that actually it's not as scary as it looks like. And there are ways to understand how it works, right? So the fundamental Mishnah enumerates those who perform the primary categories of labor. It's number 40 less 1. Yeah. 39, 40 less 1, 39, the 39 melachot. This is a term you'll often bump into, the 39 melachot, or the lamed tet melachot. As they will be in Hebrew, lamed is 30, tet is 9, lamed tet melachot. Now, let's look at the list. So we'll look at the first 10. הזורח, החורש, והקוצר, והמהמר, הדש, והזורע, הבורר, הטוחן, המרקד, והלש, והרופא. Get them in English. I don't know how good is people's English. It might be hard words here. One who sows, so that's planting seeds in the ground. One who plows, you make a line, you make a place, you prepare the ground for sowing. One who reaps, yeah, reap is harvesting. You take from the ground what you need at harvest time. One who gathers sheaves into a pile. So you're a farmer, you collect everything into a big pile. One who threshes, that's quite a hard word, removing the kernel from the husk. So you have a grain and you remove what's inside the grain, take it out. You see, in a way, you separate the outer parts from the inner. Or you're taking out the good part of the grain. One who winnows threshed grain in the wind, so that's throwing, they used to throw grain in the air, and then when it was windy, and this way the wind would separate the heavy parts and the light parts. One who selects the inedible waste from the edible, the selecting, boel, you separate the good from the bad and the good. One who grinds, you crush it into flour. One who sifts the flour in a sieve. One who kneads dough, and one who bakes. So what have we just said? We've actually mentioned the first 10. What are we really talking about? We started with sowing, and we come to baking, right? This is the seder, the order, which is called sidura de pat, the order of bread. The order of how do you get to bread. You start with the grain in the ground that you sow, and you get to bread, right? So let's talk about how exactly did all of these apply in the Mishkan. For example, they had bread. They brought bread offerings, for example, in the temple. But this is very easy to remember because it's all the stages of bread. And so now you're going to tell me, how practical is this? Yeah, there are no farmers. Who is going to do this? Yeah. So these things are called avot melachot, primary categories of labor. Primary categories of labor means to say that each one of these is a category, is an idea, and then will be applied to all sorts of things, right? So if you look at the first one, hazoreh, one who sows, right? So you'll tell me, okay, I'm not a farmer. This is not my problem. Anything you do, what's the idea of sowing, of zoreh, is you do an action, either you put a seed in the ground or you do some other action to allow the seed to grow. It could be to arrange the right amount of light. It could be to water the grain. All of this will be included in zoreh. So anybody who has plants at home, for example, he would not be allowed to water it on Shabbat. It would not be allowed to I don't know, if somebody would move it somewhere where it's going to get more nutrients. Somebody would especially move it somewhere where the light is stronger, whatever it is. Everything that's job where the purpose is to improve growth of the plant would be zorea and would be forbidden on Shabbat. One who plows, again, you will say, how practical is that? Am I going to start plowing now? Yeah, but any sort of work you do onto the ground, you make it flatter, smoother, lower, all of that would be included into this, because what is plowing? It's preparing the ground for planting. So you could have, you could start digging, would be a problem on Shabbat. It talks a lot in Shulchan Aruch about people who had, in the past, who had earth floors, yeah, before they started having wooden floors or stone floors, yeah. So you wouldn't be allowed to sweep there, yeah. This will lead to all the discussions in the poskim about the playing games in the which required a flat ground. So flattening the ground. One who reaps, kotzer, yeah. So this is collecting fruit, taking fruit, yeah. But it's not just for farmers, yeah. Somebody wants to take something off a tree. He sees a nice fruit, he needs a nice flower he wants to pick, and he has connected to the ground. That would be forbidden. One who gathers sheaves into a pile, less common. It's mentioned some things in the Talmud, maybe like fruit all around your garden, you're collecting them together. But the next one who threshes, dash, yeah. Dash is so again in the Talmud, it's a very small specific problem. Yeah, sorry, no, in the example, yeah, threshing, it's a grain and something comes out. But what's the idea of the melacha? The idea of the melacha is anything where you're taking something out of its regular place of growth, right? So here you have a grain, and you take out the kernel from the husk, as it says here in English. But we're taught in the halacha that the same would apply to squeezing. You squeeze juice out of a grape, out of an olive, wine out of a grape, oil from an olive, yeah? These would also be included in this. This is called schita, it's called squeezing. Milking a cow, yeah? That will also be a form of schita. Yeah. So you could have schita, which is going to dash, which is going to threshing. So any action where you are squeezing out from the something out of its original cover would be dash.
Slicha,
Yes.
if you're eating a plum and you're taking out the kernel, is that something bad too? Wrong?
So that's a bit different. When you're eating a plum, you're eating the actual plum, and at the end you're left with the stone. So that there you're not trying to get, you're not taking out the stone. The stone is not the main thing here. It's not like grape you squeeze it and try to get the wine out. It's not like a kernel that you're trying to take out of a husk. It's the opposite. The fruit is the food that you want to eat, and you're left with this thing inside. Yeah. The next problem, you are getting to another interesting point, which is really the next melachot. The next melachot, who winnows, who selects, who grinds, right. Then we have a few here that are actually the same. Yeah. Winnowing, we mentioned throwing the grain into the wind. Sifting the flour in a sieve. And we had selecting inedible waste from the edible. These are actually pretty much the same. The idea is the same. Yes, you have the case where they throw the grain in the sky and the wind separates the grain, separates the good and the bad. Or you have selecting, you actually have a mixture of stones and grains and you start separating, this is grain, this is stones. Or you have sifting, you actually have a sieve, yeah? Something with holes in it, and you put your flour. Yeah, in Israel you see it a lot, I think. Yeah, or in other places, maybe hot countries where they might have worms or things. But sieve the flour to make sure it's good. Yeah, to get rid of all the bad stuff that's stuck to it. So this is all under the category of selecting or borer. And I think this comes to your interesting point of removing something. This is not dash. Dash was there's something good, something meaningful you want to get out from its husk. Here we're talking about you have a mixture of things, and you want to separate what's good, what's bad, and what's from what's good. Yeah. So here this would be the melacha of borer. Yeah. The melacha of separating. I believe we will probably go more into details. There are ways to do it, right? We'll get more into details. Now we're just doing a bit of a run through of what sort of melachot here, and just to give you a bit of an idea also, and you'll see in the book more. But I'm just trying to give you an idea that why these are not just theoretical things, these are very practical. This melacha of borer will come up a lot, yeah? You have food on your plate, there's something you don't like, you want to separate it, there will be an issue of borer involved in that. In your case is actually, somebody mentioning the plum and the so you could have a problem if you have I'm trying to think. So it depends. I have to see exactly each case. It's borer is really something discussed as a proper shiur. But the main point is you're separating something bad from something good, and that will come in food. You have bones in the food. You have a type of food you don't like, you want to separate. You could have it not in food. You could have on your table, on your office table, a mess of different things, and you want to get some specific item. It's mixed with all sorts of other items. So you would have to know how to do it properly, and we'll speak about Bezrat Hashem. That is not to transgress the prohibition of borer. Then you have grinding, so the classic case, of course, they would grind the grain to get flour, right? But it's really any sort of cutting where you cut something very fine and very small, cutting vegetables very, very, very small, that would be included in the melacha of tochem. Kneading a dough. So again, you'll say you don't need doughs. I'm not going to start baking on Shabbat, maybe. Hopefully not. But it could be you could have some sort of liquid you mixed into some sort of powder. I don't know, to make something, or I think Weetabix for them could be a problem of you make the liquid and the Weetabix to mix, and it becomes a bit like a dough. So you can have many situations of lash, of kneading on a Shabbat. And then baking, again, baking is general, or fair, but that is really the whole world of cooking, which I think you're going to have a whole specific shiur just on that later, about how to deal with the kitchen. Yeah, we're going to Bezrat Hashem. You're going to see in the shiurim later and in the book on the practical what you should do, right, to avoid all these issues. But here I'm just trying to give you an idea of what the melachot are, and also to give you an idea that these are actually things that can happen, and to see that the things that we do today or we don't do on Shabbat, they're all based on the Mishnah, and they can be logically understood from there. Yeah. Okay, so that's the first part, Hidura de Pat, bread. The next step is, you tell me, shear wool, whiten the wool, comb it, tie it, color it, spin the wool, stretch it. Okay, constructing two meshes, that's a very difficult subject related to the past, the way they made strings, weaves two threads, severs two threads, ties a knot, unties a knot, sews two stitches, tears a fabric. What are we talking about? What are we making here? What is this person who does all this work? What is he trying to achieve? Anybody can tell me?
Making clothing.
Clothing, very good. So the first 10 is all about bread. The next one is all about making clothes. Of course, clothes were very important in the Mishkan. They were made, the walls were made with this, with fabric and so on, and the clothes of the Kohanim, of course, the parochet, the curtain that separated between the Holy of Holies and the Holy in the Mishkan. So shearing wool, okay? So I don't know if any of us had ever shorn a sheep, but the concept is the same. Any sort of cutting of the parts of your body before business, so cutting your own hair, having a haircut, cutting your nails, that's all related to this melacha of gozez, shearing wool, whitening the wool, and it's all the washing, laundering on Shabbat, washing your clothes on Shabbat. Obviously, you're not going to put on a washing machine, but even you have a stain on your shirt, you can't wash it off on Shabbat. One who combs the fleece and straighten it is combing fabric, combing your hair can also be an issue on Shabbat. Dyeing, coloring, any sort of color. You start coloring. You want to color something on a paper. Yeah, you want to paint. Will be forbidden. Okay, spinning and stretching is less of wool. It's less practical. Constructing two meshes. It is again less practical. And weaving, not extremely practical, but severing. Yeah, breaking. It speaks about later about tearing. Okay, that'll be severing and making threads. That means you make a thread, you open the thread, tying, right? So tying knots, that's a whole area in halacha. The basic rule is that the knot that's a short-term knot is okay. That's why you're allowed to tie your shoelaces on Shabbat and untie them. But a knot that you're going to leave it there and you make it properly so it stays closed would be forbidden. Sewing with a needle is forbidden. Tearing, yeah. Tearing is you've noticed in most synagogues there'll be separate toilet paper for Shabbat, yeah, which is already torn. Or people use tissues or something else because you can't actually tear on Shabbat. Yeah, you'll see in any observant Jewish home. So that's all related to clothing. What are we making next? One who traps a deer, slaughters it, flays it, that's a hard word, flays it. What is it in Hebrew again, to flay? Mafshit, yeah, you remove the skin. One who salts its hide, you salt it. And one who tans it, you turn it into leather. One who smooths it, and one who cuts it into measured parts. So that's the next step. People make shoes. They make shoes from leather. So this is the whole process. So trapping, you trap an animal, you trap so it can't move. Not extremely practical. Even here, there are cases that could happen today. Sometimes people have double glazed windows. A bug gets stuck in between if you close the window. There are cases, but not so common. Slaughtering. So slaughtering an animal, I don't think any of us here is a shochet, but killing a bug. That's all. Any sort of killing any animal would be shochet. Flaying it, removing its skin, not so practical. Salts its hide, not so practical. There are some situations, I believe, where it's brought down. You eating the skin of some animal as part of the food, putting salt in. There could be some cases. Tanning, not so common. Smoothing it. There are some cases where you would smoothen. Yeah, here this is where all the discussions come about. Aspects of solid soap, for example, not using it, or anything where you're smoothing a solid piece, cutting something into measured parts. There are also some cases that whole for the measuring as well. Then you have perhaps some of the most practical ones. Again, to connect it back to the Mishkan, they would trap a deer. They would make leather. There were many parts which were made of leather. Cover to protect the Mishkan from the rain, which was made of leather. So leather played a role in the Mishkan as well. Writing, yeah, interesting here it mentions 2 letters and erasing 2 letters. You'll often find in the Talmud very specific amounts. And only somebody who's done the Averah, who's done the sin, a certain amount of it, he would be liable for the punishment. But it doesn't, not so practical for us. We don't have these punishments today, but to know that there is such a thing, that's why it says 2 letters. Yeah. But writing is forbidden on Shabbat. Erasing, removing the writing is forbidden on Shabbat. Building and dismantling. And this doesn't just mean I'm going to build a whole house. Very, very small things of building could be a problem. Yeah, you have a shelf that came out from your cupboard. You could be putting it back, could be building. There's many questions of building, extinguishing a fire, and lighting a fire. Right? This is of course very famous because this comes into the whole question of electricity. That's why we don't turn on electricity, turn off the light, turn on the light. This is the whole question of fire. Somebody mentioned lighting candles. This is the reason why the Chachamim instituted candle lighting, because in candlelight we can't light candles on Shabbat, so we light them before, so it should be light in the house on Shabbat. Striking a blow with the hammer to complete the production, that's makebet patish, a very, very difficult halacha to define, but basically it means, or they would in the Mishkan make some sort of blow which would finish off the Mishkan or finish off a specific object in the Mishkan. Anything that makes an item usable and finishes off the object. And one who carries out an object from domain to domain, that's, I think, again, something you could have a whole shiur about, carrying the domains. The main idea is not to carry from your house to outside, from your house from outside to inside. And this is a very, very important melacha. It's extremely practical. We check our pockets before we go out on Shabbat. This is of course extremely practical. So this is really the framework, and this is where things are based on. There are also, and you'll see them when you read the book, when you read the chapter, you'll see there are also prohibitions, because as you can see, it's very easy for a person to fall into the trap of doing one of these melachot on Shabbat. So there are also rabbinic prohibitions that were made to protect the Shabbat. Yeah, because if you understand that every one of these melachot is a very serious sin if it's done on Shabbat, so they also made certain gzerot, certain protection that you shouldn't fall into them, and those will also play a very important role. I'm just going to check for you stop the sharing. I'll just check for you first the pages in the PDF, in the document that you have, the Rabbi Steinsaltz's book, in the book rather, so you have the paperback even, that you will need to read for to prepare for next week's shiur. And then, right, so the chapter that you should read is called Structure of Shabbat. Structure of Shabbat, page 379 till the page 413. The first chapter in the part of Shabbat and festivals, starting on page 379. So you should read that as a preparation for next week. And that's where the shiur will continue from. Now, I'll give you a little bit of time for questions. I saw there was one question already here. Okay, first of all, very practical question. Which one of the books? So we're talking about the book, which is called A Concise Guide to Halacha, an overview of Jewish law. Yeah. Okay, there was also an earlier question about Hamotzi. Yeah. Do you have to have Hamotzi with the Shabbat meal? Yes. So on Shabbat, we have 3 meals. I mean, you're going to have it later by Natan from Malmö. He's going to teach you about it in the later shiurim. And we have the basic idea is we have 3 meals, and ideally at each meal we should have bread. And actually on the first, many people are careful at all the 3 meals to have each time 2 breads, and that's connected going back to the Jews in the desert. In the desert we received manna from heaven. Manna from heaven was the food we ate, special food that fell from heaven, and we got it every day except on except on Shabbat. And on Friday we got a double portion. To symbolize a double portion, we put 2 chalot. That's in every Jewish home. You will see the 2 chalot, Friday night and Shabbat lunch. And many people also will try to do that for Seudah Shlishit. So yes, one should have hamotzi both Friday night and Shabbat lunch, and ideally also for the 3rd meal in the afternoon of Shabbat, which is Seudah Shlishit. However, Seudah Shlishit, usually it is brought down. One can be more lenient if it's difficult, especially it's very practical in these Nordic countries. Soon Shabbat is going to start going out very early, and by the time you come from the synagogue, you're having lunch at 12:30 or 1 o'clock, and Shabbat is over at 4. So how are you supposed to squeeze in 2 meals, Shabbat lunch and Seudah Shlishit? So then you can be more lenient and just have mezonot, like a cookie or something like that, for your Seudah Shlishit, or a fruit. So that would be fine. But definitely Friday night and Shabbat lunch, one should have bread, unless one has a health condition. You cannot eat bread. Of course, Shabbat was not given for suffering. You're not supposed to suffer for eating bread. That's not the point. But anybody who's normal and healthy can eat normal bread, should do so. Okay. Other questions? Is somebody speaking? Sorry.
I'm thinking of how are you allowed to walk? How much?
Okay, excellent question. So as you saw, there's nothing in those melachot about walking. So technically, based on the melachot, you could walk as much as you want, but very good that you pointed it out. There is a prohibition of tchum Shabbat, of the limits of Shabbat, the boundaries of Shabbat. It's based on the fact in the Torah it says, do not go to pick up man in the desert on Shabbat. And one explanation is they couldn't go because it was far, it was outside of the Tchum. You're not allowed to leave your place. So therefore, there is a prohibition of going more than 2,000 cubits, 2,000 amot. 1 amma is this length from here to here. It's about 1.5 kilometers. 2,000 amot is about 1.5 kilometers from your place. However, very, very important point. This is your place, is the city or the town where you live. And the town ends where the last house of the town is, and after that you have empty space. So practically speaking, I think most of us on a normal Shabbat, we're not going to have this problem, because if you live in a city, it's going to take a long, long time and a lot of walking before you'll get to the end of the city, and you'll have to start worrying about crossing the Tchum. You'll probably spend the whole day walking without leaving your city, at least definitely in Helsinki, in Stockholm, Copenhagen, all of these bigger towns. When it will become more practical, especially in the Nordic countries, many people like to go on holiday to their summer cottage. I think you also have this culture in Sweden and Norway. Definitely in Finland, it's very popular. If you have a house in the middle of nowhere or a tiny village, then you should know that this is the halacha. You're not allowed to walk more than further than that 1.5 kilometer radius around your little house or village. Okay, a lot of questions here. Is it allowed to squeeze a lemon for salad? Okay, excellent question. So, as I mentioned, there's a prohibition of schita, of squeezing. The interesting thing, since it's based the idea of schita is you're taking the liquid out of a solid. So therefore, you take a fruit, you take a lemon and squeeze it into a glass. That would be prohibited, because then you're creating a drink. But when you squeeze a lemon into a salad, very, very interesting, Talmud and the Shulchan Aruch, the Jewish law tells us, you're not creating lemon juice. You're taking something solid, a lemon, and you're taking something from there that's also for the purpose of something solid, which is a salad. So the lemon juice has never got an entity of its own, and it just becomes a part of the salad. And therefore, squeezing lemon juice is not considered taking liquid out of a solid. It's considered taking solid out of a solid. And interestingly enough, it's perfectly permitted. You are allowed to squeeze lemon into a salad. You will not be allowed to squeeze lemon into your tea, or squeeze lemon into an empty glass and make lemon juice, because that would be taking liquid out of a solid. But you are allowed to squeeze lemon onto a salad. You are allowed to squeeze lemon onto your fish. Okay. My mic did not work. Can you please repeat why it is allowed to tie shoes and is not considered as tying a knot? Very good. So the knots that they made in the Mishkan, they were permanent knots. They were knots that stayed on. They were made forever. Yeah. There's discussion. How long is it? For a week? Is it for a day? Whatever the purpose is. But a knot that's not going to even be on for a knot. Sorry, a knot that's not even going to be. Not going to be closed even for 24 hours. Your normal shoelaces, you're going to open them within 24 hours. So that's got no kiyum. It's got no standing at all. So that was perfectly fine. You're allowed to tie shoelaces and untie shoelaces. Some people, there are different opinions on whether on double knots, but from what I understand, even that there's room to be lenient even on double knots in shoes, because it's completely it's not how do I say it's not permanent at all. Yeah. If you were to make a long-term knot, so that's an interesting thing. I heard there are some shoes where the knots are just for show, and then really you can remove your shoe with a zip or something. There you would not be allowed to make the knot, because the knot is just for show. You're not gonna reopen it every time, and then it would be forbidden. Okay. Very good. I'm very happy to see a lot of questions, because that means everybody was listening. New York may be complicated, yeah. So I don't know.
I have a question.
Yeah. Can I just go through the ones in the chat, because otherwise, you know, there's been a chat and there's been a hand has been raised. So we'll go one by one. Okay. New York may be complicated. Yeah, absolutely. It's very complicated. The whole idea of Tchumei Shabbat is extremely complicated. I once tried to ask a question from a rabbi, and he said, "You have to give me a map," and then he can draw it. It's that's an area of halakha that's quite complicated. I myself do not know. Can't say I'm an expert on it. In Israel, strings are drawn to the sphere of Shabbat even inside the city. Why? Okay, now that's a very good point. So you are referring, Arad Yanai here is referring to the Eruv. That's a completely different point, nothing to do with Tchum Shabbat. That's got to do with the last melacha we mentioned, the melacha of carrying on Shabbat, right? So the melacha of Hotza'ah. So you're not allowed to carry on Shabbat, as we mentioned. And the main prohibition of carrying on Shabbat is carrying from one domain to another, from a public domain to a private domain. Yeah, basically, in day-to-day terms, you can't carry from inside a house to the street, or from the street to the house. Now, in many communities in Israel, it's almost every city, and also abroad, some communities which have large religious Jewish populations, like Antwerp or Manchester, London, probably some parts of New York. What they'll do, they'll make an eruv, which is a very complicated thing in halakha to make, which, like you said, often consists of attaching certain strings to certain places. And you're creating something that in halakha is considered a wall. And once the area is considered, according to halakha, surrounded by a wall, then the whole place is like one house. And then you'll be allowed to carry an object from inside this area all around this area because it's all one house. Yeah. So in Yerushalayim, for example, where you have the Eruv, people you'll see very religious Jews, no problem at all. They'll be carrying objects all around the city because the whole city will be considered one surrounded by the Eruv. So that's that's got nothing to do with Tchumin. Tchumin is a different area. There's also Eruv Tchumin. That's a different area. This hotzah, this carrying, is day-to-day life. This you really have to know in order to keep Shabbat. Yeah, in this, none of the Nordic countries have an Eruv, at least for the moment. You leave your house and there's something in your pocket on Shabbat. You have done the prohibition of carrying on Shabbat. And in place where they have an Eruv, you can carry everywhere within the Eruv. Well, once you leave the Eruv, you cannot carry. Very important thing, by the way. I'm just saying this. Very often Israeli tourists or Israeli businessmen, they come abroad, and some of them are even religious, but because they're so used to the Eruv, they don't understand the whole concept of carrying. And they have something in their pocket, don't even think about it. Because they're so used to carrying is not a problem, because where they live in Israel, there's an Eruv everywhere. But it's important to know that in a place where there is no Eruv, it's absolutely prohibited to carry from inside to outside. B'ezrat Hashem, I'm sure there'll be more chance to talk more about this.
This applies also for children who cannot walk. Like you cannot carry them outside of a room.
Right. Yeah. If your child cannot walk, you will not be able to carry them. This is one of the harder parts. One of the harder parts of Shabbat. Yes, you will not be able to carry. There are certain situations sometimes with the child, like when he's learning to walk and you get stuck somewhere and how to come back. B'ezrat Hashem we should talk about that more specifically. But there's a general rule: you cannot carry your child on Shabbat. Yeah, it's one of the harder thing often for mothers is in Shmirat Shabbat in these places where there's no Eruv. One solution often is to arrange someone to babysit a bit. Everybody takes a turn. Someone, the husband looks after the child, the wife can go out. So the wife looks after the child, the husband can go out. Sometimes ask a friend to babysit, so the husband and wife can go out together. But this is something very important to look into and to arrange in order to keep Shabbat properly. One of the big reasons, we used to live 25 minutes away from the synagogue. Now we live 3 minutes away. One of the big reasons that we chose this apartment is because my son, who's 2, he can just about walk a short distance. So now, Baruch Hashem, we can walk. My wife can walk and come to synagogue and so on. Yeah. I don't believe we have time for it today, but can we talk a bit more about the spiritual aspect of why we're doing all these things on Shabbat? Okay. That's a fair question. I'm definitely sure it's part of the curriculum, but I'm happy that you brought it up because definitely there is a lot to talk about in the holiness of Shabbat. And I also very strongly would recommend that you read up on it. There are some very beautiful books. There's a lot of text online. There are some very good books. B'ezrat Hashem. We could try to think also what to recommend. I can't think. I'm on the top of my tongue, but there's a lot to read about the holiness and the kedusha of Shabbat. All of the practical things are there to bring you to that. Milking a cow and feeding animals is allowed because it's animal cruelty. Okay, that's a good point. That's a different point. So milking cows, that was actually, it's not something I've looked personally very much into. It's something there's a lot of discussions in the early days of Israel and the Yishuv and the Kibbutz and all that. How do you deal with it? You're right. There's a very big leniency in halakha. If something is cruel to animals, we can allow certain things. You will not be allowed to break what's clearly forbidden in the Torah, but things which are not from the Torah, which are rabbinical, for example, you would be able to do in order to save animals from pain. So I believe, for example, one of the tricks was to milk the cow into something which is not going to be used, or into something dirty, so that you're just milking the cow and not to help it, but you're not actually going to use the milk. So then it would not be the prohibition because you're not extracting something useful. There was, I think sometimes they've used non-Jews. That's a whole area of halacha, asking non-Jews to do melachot. So they might have asked non-Jews to milk the cows. I think nowadays, often I think in Israel also, they might be on timers, even the machines that milk the cows. There are solutions for that, but you're quite right. We always look for a solution to avoid animal cruelty. And feeding your own animals, not only you're allowed, it's an obligation. If you have animals, you have to feed them. There's a very interesting story. I remember once our teacher, Rabbi Falk, in yeshiva, he told about a gentleman who would come to the yeshiva. He lived quite far, he would walk, and he came on Shabbat, and he came to the prayers in the morning. And then he was going to make Kiddush. And the rabbi said, wait a second, you have a dog, don't you? I said, yeah, I have a dog, I left it home. You're not allowed to make Kiddush, you're not allowed to eat before you fed your dog. Yeah, you have an obligation, not connected to Shabbat, but the whole year round, you have an obligation to make sure your animals have food before you eat yourself. Okay. So Bubbles, it's a good question. I don't have the resources with me to ask on the spot, but that's a good question. I think we should get back to it. Carrying keys, that's a whole area. How do we do it? Bezrat Hashem, either I will get to that. I think I will get to that, Bezrat Hashem. Yeah, there are a few ways how to arrange keys on Shabbat. You're not the first one who woke up to the problem that how do I get home on Shabbat? It's been discussed for 1,000 years, so we'll get to that. I have to go for today. Toda Rabba. Very good. Excellent. Lighting a light in modern times doesn't require work in Tanakh. Why not change the restriction? Okay, that I think is a very, very essential question. I think if you listen to the beginning of the shiur I just gave, and if you didn't, you can listen to the recording. That's exactly the point I was trying to make. The melachot are not connected to work. You can have an extremely tiny, small action, which will be absolutely forbidden. You can have a very heavy job that will be completely permitted. You are not allowed to do melacha because you have to imitate God, who did not create on the last day and connect to God on that day. Yeah, it's not a question of hard work. You have a Shabbat bell for keys. That's a very good answer. The big why, what beautiful book. Okay, Rabbi Yair said that soap bubbles is a problem done above grass, as this would be watering plant. Very good. That's going back to Zorea we mentioned earlier. Now there are a few hands raised here. Rebecca Ketura, you still want to ask something? I see your hand is raised.
I do. I was just wondering because, like, I'm in the process of buying a flat, and what's happening lately?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
So I think
Hello.
I think we can stop here, and Bezrat Hashem, you all read the chapter, and if there are any questions, please.
Rav Shmuel, we have a question. Sorry, Rebecca maybe you couldn't hear her. Rebecca was asking a question.
I wasn't sure that you could hear me, so I just stopped.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, what I've noticed lately is that, especially in Oslo, a lot of flat buildings or flats of blocks, they've started changing out the key locks for like electronic door locks. And so I was just wondering if within the rabbinical community, if you started discussing this, because like I've been to viewings and they don't have a physical lock, so you can't get into your building without using electricity, basically.
Yeah, that is a very, very big problem. You should really try to find an apartment. I don't know what the situation is in Oslo. Here, it's starting to come here as well. Baruch Hashem, most apartments still have regular keys. It's a big problem because we can't use electricity on Shabbat. I know I have relatives in Paris who went through this. Baruch Hashem, they made Aliyah and they live in Israel, but they had this problem, and they would often wait around for somebody non-Jewish to go out and go out at the same time, wait for somebody to go in. Often it's very, very hard to do so. So I don't really have much of a solution. there might be some things you would be allowed to do if somebody is stuck outside and it's freezing cold and he can't get back in. But as a general basis, you cannot use electricity. So one should really not move into such a place. And if somebody lives in such a place, one should do his utmost to move somewhere else so that he'll be able to be part of the normal life of Shabbat, because otherwise a person will very likely end up being quite stuck at home on Shabbat. I don't know if Moshe David has any more advice in this case. If you know more, if there's anything else you can do. I don't know if you have it a lot in your community.
Yeah, there is an ongoing discussion, as you said, within the rabbinical community, because it's becoming very, very difficult. And one of the things I would say is that even solutions that you could find which would bypass the problem don't bypass the issue itself, in which you're bypassing the framework that we want to have for Shabbat. So even if one were to find a technical solution, it's not a good one to be using to be based on electricity and violating the Shabbat through electricity, even through a child, for example, or other means, is not something which is sustainable or something that we would want for the long run. However, the problem is becoming more and more common, as you say, not only in buildings, but in apartments themselves. Spending Shabbat at a hotel, for example. There's one hotel that I know of in Malmö that I've spoken to the manager, and that's something also important to think of. You're going to visit. The older the hotel is, the more chances that there's and family-oriented hotels, I think, are a good solution, because you can, first of all, you have someone to talk to. It's not like Scandic Hotel that there's no one personal to talk to. And also, if it's family-oriented, many times they can either they will be old enough that they have manual keys, or maybe you can actually talk to them before Shabbat, that they open the room for you, and arrange that when they, might sound strange, but say, I actually need your help. I'm not allowed to open the door on Shabbat. And if you arrange it before Shabbat, that could be a solution. Within private homes, it's much more difficult to have a regular solution like that. We lived it for a while in a building like that, and my wife was at home, and we'd have to yell at her to the third floor when we came home from Shabbat service, so that one of the kids would come down to open up. So it's not a good, I would say that in the rains of Malmö in the middle of the winter, that's not such a good situation to be in. And my wife kept coming down every 15 minutes to see if we had come home. So it is quite difficult. And it's also about prioritization. If you're thinking of moving anyway, then to move to an apartment that have this in mind in terms of both the distance to the shul, as well as these issues that that Rav Shmuel has and that you have raised here. See, Rav Shmuel, they're not letting you go today. I think it's actually wonderful. We have Hanan was raising his hand before, I think, and Romina is raising her hand as well.
Yes, I can start. So about the key thing, isn't it like some rabbis talks about they can do it with a shnui, I think it was called, like if you put the electric key in your mouth and you open it with your mouth. Yeah, I don't know. I remember I wrote one time to a religious place in Jerusalem. I cannot find the email, but I was asking the same question, and I actually got that answer that if there was nothing to do, then you can use this type of halakha. But I know it's not recognized by all the Orthodox rabbis. So it's just, why not gather all the rabbis and just figure something out? Because all the keys are like being changed everywhere. And I'm talking about Denmark. So yeah, I don't have the problem anymore, but still. So that.
I think.
Rav Shmuel, do you want to respond?
It's a hard question. No. I think first I have to explain to you what you're talking about. The question, this concept of shinui, of changing something, maybe it'll be a good thing to even start next week's melacha to understand issue with this. But in order for something to be a melacha from the Torah, it has to have certain criteria to make it into a melacha. And one of these criteria is in order that you should be able to be considered melacha from the perspective of the Torah, and that one would be punishable for it, it would have to be done in the normal way of the melacha. And that's why you're mentioning this idea of doing something with your mouth, doing with the back of your hand, doing a funny way, which then it will be considered a shinui, and then it will not be the main melacha. It will still be rabbinically prohibited, but it won't be prohibited in the Torah. Now, you're not allowed to break rabbinic law either, but there is an idea of certain rabbinical laws, especially if they're very far removed from the original law, to be allowed in certain case situations of shatat chak, very, very difficult situations, which, like you're mentioning, maybe somebody's stuck out and he can't get in. It could be considered such a difficult situation. The problem is, like Rav Moshe David said, it's one thing for a rabbi to allow one person in one specific case one thing, and another thing to make it a rule for your life as a day in, day out, because we're not talking about something that's permitted. Yeah, in halakha, you'll see very often there is lechatchila. This is okay, and there is something else called shatat chak, difficult situation, bediavad. After it's done, it's okay. Many situations you'll find when you do kasher and kashrut, you'll see it a lot. They'll be given very, very strict rules, what you have to do in your kosher kitchen, what you're not allowed to do. And then very often you make a mistake and you call the rabbi, it's fine, the food is kosher. Like, so why am I keeping all these super strict rules then? No, there's a way things are meant to be done. And then something you're stuck. What am I going to do now? That's, by the way, why it's very important to have a rabbi, to ask your questions, to have a connection to a rabbi, not just read from a book, not just learn the rules yourself, not just go online and listen to shiurim. There has to be someone you have a connection to discuss your specific case. Because otherwise, you can very easily get the wrong end of the stick both ways. You can become too strict, or you can become too lenient and say, okay, I heard some rabbi said something is okay, and then you just make it into your regular life, and that, as Moshe David said, you are really going to lose the Shabbat completely. There was somebody else here.
I just want to mention, I think all of these questions that you're raising are very good, because some of them are practical, but it also leads us to a deeper understanding of halakha and how halakha works, and the concepts of what we're trying to, what is the goal. And at the end of the day, if we bypass all of the time because of our circumstances, then we end up losing the goal, which is to keep Shabbat and have an environment of Shabbat, and not to violate the Shabbat, not to transgress the Shabbat. So there's a delicate balance, and basically many of these questions come from within living in communities, which if we had stronger, hopefully Bezrat Hashem, many more people like you who are keeping Shabbat properly, then there will be a demand to make an eruv, for an example. There will be a demand for a better kashrut. There will be demand to have solutions for Shabbat. Oh, and you see that in the stronger communities in Europe as well, as Rav Shmuel mentioned earlier. So the more I think we strengthen one another, and sometimes it is to compromise, but also sometimes to create demands. We actually had a discussion about an eruv, perhaps in Malmö, which might be the first one in the Nordic countries. It's in discussion right now. So if you have enough people who demand something, then don't be don't be shameful of it. I think you should be proud that you have these problems, so to say, because it means that you're serious about keeping halakha. So thank you very much, Rav Shmuel, for today and for answering all of these questions. It's fantastic, and the seriousness of this group. And Bezrat Hashem will see each other next week. Don't forget the homework that you've been given, which the next year will be based on the fact that you've done your homework. So please do so. Shalom, Shavua Tov, and Toda Rabba, Rav Shmuel, Litraot.
Bye.
תודה רבה. שבוע טוב.